said, my name is Whitney Major. I teach at Lakeside High School. I recently took a position there this year, and I am teaching physics and physical science for them. I am a Strive mentor, so I've been around for 3 years now. Keep hanging on, haunting him like a ghost. But Strive has truly impacted my instructional practices and therefore the learning of my students in my classroom. So when I was an engineering student at Louisiana Tech, I took a class to fill my hourly requirements for my scholarship. And I was not a member of the teaching program, but somehow I was approved to take this classroom management course. And it ultimately set me on my path to my true career, which is teaching. So during this course, she continually talked about the key to managing a classroom effectively was to create these learning hooks so that students could make a deeper connection to the material. And this is exactly what Strive does. And it's done for me. So it gives me the foundation in which to build from so that my students create these connections or learning hooks to the material that they are learning. My placement this summer was specifically with Strive. You can go ahead and click to the next slide. My placement this summer was with Triumph. And this is a really cool industry. They actually repair airplane parts for large companies like UPS, FedEx, and the military. The amount of paperwork that they initially have to go through in order to bring an airplane part in and then repair it and move it out the door is astronomical. If those departments don't work together as a whole, then the airplane part can't get repaired on time and pushed back out. They have to work together as a group to ensure that this part's repaired on time because ultimately airplanes cannot pull over. So I was given the opportunity to see each department from the time an airplane part came in until the time it left. And during this process, one interaction really caught my eye or caught my attention. It was the lab testing. So one thing that I learned about growing up, I watched the Aaron Brockovich movie about hexavalent chromium. And here in Hot Springs, during the sanding process of the repair of airplane parts, they release this hexavalent chromium into the environment. Now, they try to capture as much as they can, but it's not an enclosed building. It's out, and employees are exposed to it. On my first day of training, they handed me a packet, and that was the first page as soon as I opened up the packet, and I was like, oh wow, what is this? And so I kept finding myself, even though I was in these multiple departments, I created maps for them. I redid some of their stock room. I kept finding myself back in the lab. And so the environmental guy had walked around with me during the first week, and he had talked about this hexavalent chromium and how they convert it into an insoluble form, which is chromium-3. And so that's what I use to implement into my lesson. So the skills that I took away from there were like measurement, problem solving, teamwork, communication, and organization. If you could click to the next slide. My lesson ultimately was all about chromium and how its properties are affected or have an environmental effect. And we start out with just the basic essential questions. Every lesson that I create has what's called learning targets. And so they are I can statements, essentially, that the students rate themselves on throughout the process of the lesson. And we always link those to just basic essential vocabulary and things like that. So I use this concept in my classroom through a discussion of the properties of elements and elemental ions, and in regards to their reactivity and health hazards for the environment. My students ultimately learned about water runoff, water pollutants, and used their research to discoveries to engineer a device, test a water sample from our campus, and write a water report. Throughout this process, they learned about the different careers within the water system, specifically in the lab, and I did focus on that both out in the field and then directly in the lab. And the students did a target rating for themselves, and then that growth is shown there in those charts. They also took a survey and answered specific questions like, do you know someone who works in a STEM career, or are you interested in a STEM career? And you can see those charts there. There is some student sample work, like a water
1 minute
report.
warning.
Okay, he got me. There is some student sample work, like a water report, but I just wanted to read a little excerpt from one of my students, their water reports at the end. So they enjoy learning the process and the connection that it makes to the business in their community. And they compared the water sample from Triumph and water samples that they collected from on campus. And they ultimately found that our water was not as clean as Triumph's water. And so the student had said that something she learned in the project was that Triumph was actually an airplane manufacturer. She thought it was a shoe company, and that there are more contaminants in water besides just dirt. She ultimately learned that STEM skills, about STEM skills and science and technology and math are just basic skills, and there's a difference between STEM and STEM skills in careers. All right, thank you.
Thanks so much, Whitney. Thoughts, comments, questions?
I just wanted to say that Whitney and I taught the lesson together. She taught her class, I taught mine. And my students also learned a lot throughout the process as well. Not only did we incorporate some of the things she didn't mention, they had to calculate the area of the parking lot in the back, and they had to determine runoff and then evaluate our campus, where the water from our campus flows into the community. So there was a lot to this lesson, and I think she did a fabulous job with it. Kudos to her. Some of my kids are now interested in going out into a STEM career, possibly working on water collection, things that they didn't know existed.
Yeah, we have tons. So even in our computer classes, I think it's called East, one of the students who I kind of read some of her papers, she's actually working on a project for how to filter water, capture and filter water for a homeless shower shelter, and it needs to be portable, and she's been doing all this research, and so she just loves the fact that it connected to what she was doing in another class.
It's fantastic. I think that this and High Troll and many of our other business partners, it's less obvious to people in their communities what they do and the careers that exist there. So it's super cool to have that kind of unveiled. But I think even at some of the more, you would assume more standard places like Central Arkansas Water that has a pretty clear description in their name, what they do, people don't understand what it goes into working there and what they do in relation to the community. So I think that it's so exciting. Like if I had more time, I would love to just go and shadow all of the teachers that get to do these placements over the summer and find out what happens in all these businesses. Triumph is one of those that just sounded super exciting and interesting. Any other comments?
I have a question about the insoluble chromium 3 that was produced from the hexavalent chromium. What do they do with that finally? Do they like burn it, or?
It goes through a chemical process, so they mix it with two different ones. I know it's a sulfate and a phosphate, and any of the solid that comes back out, they put into these waste containers, and then those containers kind of set back there on the lot and until someone picks them up. Mary and I actually went out and got water from the site on a little recon mission so our students could test it. And I focused on the runoff from that area specifically.
There's actually one of the labs, what's it? Dr. Bailey may know it offhand, but the Vesuvian volcano ammonium dichromate, it's that one that actually produces it, or it produces either hexavalent chromium. I think it's one of those that was the big Erin Brockovich it produces as a byproduct. And is that the one, Dr. Bailey? I don't know off the top of my head. I think it is. That's why you're not supposed to do it in your classroom, because it's slightly carcinogenic. If you do, you've got to do very careful disposal measures.
Even with using a fume hood, it's not good enough?
Well, it's disposing it because you've got to have it specifically marked in something, because it becomes a deal where you've got to have the powder, because you definitely can't just flush that down the sink.
Or put it in.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges for schools are it costs a lot of money to properly dispose of these. So while
Right.
Whitney may have been describing these containers that are sitting out on the lot, those are usually pretty hardy containers that don't have any runoff or leachate. And then professional companies come and know exactly what the process is for disposing or recycling or reusing some of these compounds.
And
Be
we
super
also,
interesting.
through that process, they figured out that the water we collected from the Triumph site was actually cleaner than ours because of our lead piping. And so I had several students who tested, because they tested water from the entire campus inside and outside. And one of them said, our building has the highest lead. And she was like, can I write a report and present it to the principal? And I was like, sure, let's go for it.
How did you test for lead concentrations and other metals?
We just did a test strip. It was the easiest. We used some of the veneer equipment for basic things like pH and temperature, but I just used test strips that I had ordered off of an online site. Those were the easiest to implement into the classroom, especially with ninth graders. They're not precise or anything like that, but I could have her suggest ways, that could be better tested.
Yeah, that's tough too, because it's like you get into conversations about the connection between autism and lead piping type of stuff, and it's crazy. Anyway.
It also allows us the forum to have conversations that, yes, you need data to make decisions, but you also need to know what the limitation of your measurements are. And so a test strip off of Amazon is a really good starting point of where to start looking, but it's probably not conclusive enough to write a report that we publish in the local newspaper that gets people in trouble. So like figuring out how and where we use different types of data and what why it is that we have professional companies, use very expensive equipment and training, which are jobs that are out there and available. And then how we use that in the bigger picture. I think that there's some really cool conversations that can be started from that.
Yeah,
I
think they just really like the opportunity. Go ahead.
For sure. Yeah, you're opening their eyes to a whole world of contaminations or, what is in water. It's not just water. So I really love it. Thank you.